All right, welcome back to Resilient Voices and Beyond. I'm so excited for this episode that I have for you guys. This is episode 44, and it's just a long time coming. Just to think, I started this January 7th, and I really had the idea of what this is going to be, but really the ins and outs was beyond me. So as I've been continuing to grow and speaking with many different guests with many different parts to play in the child welfare arena, whether lived experience or just a regular stakeholder or community leader, I've been able to learn so much personally. But I hope, throughout this journey that I've been able to educate you all a little bit more. So without further ado, because I'm excited and you guys know I can talk, I'm gonna have my guest introduce herself.
Hello, my name is Rachel Willis, and I am the director of the Bureau of Out-of-Home Services with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. So what that means is I oversee all of the child welfare programming within the state of Michigan in our central office arena that has to do with foster care, adoption, guardianship, juvenile justice, and our Michigan Children's Institute work. So within the Children's Services Agency, we have our executive director, and then we have 3 bureaus that really focus on dividing the work of a lot of the oversight and policy and making sure that we're in compliance with a lot of things across the state. And so we have what's called the Out-of-Home Services Bureau, which is my neck of the woods. So that's anything that has to do after the removal of a child has occurred within child welfare. So any of that work or programming is in my bureau. And then we have in-home services, which would be all of our prevention work and child protective services work. And then we have like sort of our finance, policy, legislative liaison bureau work. And then we have all of the field or local offices. So all of the offices in each of the counties that actually has the investigators and the specialist staff working out in the communities. So that's what child welfare looks like at a 1,000-foot view organizationally across the state. So my leadership role is in that director level bureau at our central office location for out-of-home services.
Awesome. So I just want to say it is such a privilege and honor to have you on today. And more so to say, not just to have you on, but to be able to showcase, a part of MDHS here, what you guys do. My first question, because I wanted to be able to understand the separation with the bureaus, is that new, or is that with like the directors and what have you?
Yeah, so it's relatively new. So I joined the department in February of 2021. So I'm just going on a little over a year here. And I know you've got some questions asking about my background, but I came from a private sector agency doing the same work in child welfare. And I joined the department in the beginning of 2021, and they had just reorganized what their structure looked like. So we've always had the county offices, right? So there's 83 counties in Michigan, and in some instances, we may have like a bi-county or a tri-county where they kind of consolidate resources together. But for the most part, we, are divided up across the state that way. But there's always been sort of a central office, is what we call it, structure that it has to roll up the data, right? That has to receive all the information, make sure we're in compliance with policies, make sure we're in compliance with finance regulations. We are governed by child welfare laws in the legislature that implements boilerplate language that is tied to our resources that says, in order to access these resources, here are your compliance points you have to be in charge of. So somebody's always had to sort of manage that to make sure we're turning in the paperwork, turning things into the federal government, taking care of funding, taking care of policy. And at the end of 2020, the executive director at the time sort of looked at what structure was necessary to make sure that there was the right leaders in place to make sure each of these buckets were following those requirements. So that concept of having what we call bureau directors has only been in place for a little over a year now, where we've had the out-of-home bureau, the in-home bureau, and our administrative bureau. And something else I don't think I really understood until I joined the department is when people say MDHHS, that is a broad umbrella of services, right?
Mhm.
So there's the work that I do, which is what's called the Children's Services Agency. So that's all the child welfare work. And so we have an executive director. His name is Demetrius Starling, and that's our executive director of the Children's Services Agency. But within MDHHS, there's many other agencies that are just as big and complex as we are. So there's a behavioral health side, there's Medicaid, there's all of these different buckets that are all under the MDHHS umbrella. And so I'm just in this agency that we call Children's Services Agency.
Definitely. And looking at it, in that scale, it seems so massive. and it's crazy for me as a person with lived experience. You like, well, this is the world I grew up in, this is this, so I couldn't imagine it being any bigger. But as I grew older and started to work in the child welfare arena myself, I started to see like this is a huge umbrella that kind of spans out, and it fascinated me. So I don't steer too far away. Getting into my first question here, kind of, telling me a little bit of your background, your experience, and to give you a little background of what that question is, I interview a lot of people in this arena, and one thing in my experience is, we see the work sometimes and we don't really know the person, or what their why was and why they started. So I configured this question to kind of present the person in a very authentic and real aspect, so people can like, wow, this is her, this is, I feel connected,
Yeah.
So my first question is, what has been your experience to bring you to this work and doing this work, and what has been your why?
Yeah. So that's a great question. And it's kind of one of those things where, you see people in these positions and you hear these titles before or after their names. And, I always have to remind myself, we all put our pant legs on one leg at a time. I think for the most part, we put our pants on one leg at a time. But I was born and raised in Lansing, Michigan. So Michigan is home for me. This has been home base for me. My family's moved here the summer before I was born, and that was it. This is all I've known. Went to high school in Lansing, and then I went on to Michigan State University. And so Michigan State is where I earned my bachelor's and master's degree. I always joke because Lansing is also home to Magic Johnson, and I went to the same high school as Magic Johnson. And I had the pleasure of meeting him one day. And when I did my introduction, I was like, I went to the same high school and college as you, were practically the same person. And he was like, I think, so I always joke about that. Like, you never know, like small town people can do really big things if you think Lansing's a small town. But in my trajectory, my life growing up, I was raised by my parents. I had both of my parents in my household, and I was fortunate enough to have my paternal grandparents in my life. My grandmother's still living. My grandfather passed away a few years ago, but in the time that I did have my grandfather in my life, he was very instrumental in influencing success and wanting, especially as a person of color, making sure that I created opportunities to have seats at the table and try to see what was the leadership you were working for, right? So he was always like, don't just do the job, see what opportunities you have to lead the job. Like that was always what he was like. If you don't see how it's done, get yourself a seat at the table and figure out how it's done. And so my grandfather was very like, go against the establishment. He did the protests in the 60s, went to the March on Washington in 63, was just very active and proactive in civil rights. And so that's just inherently ingrained in me, was just to keep trying. And it was also impressed upon me that it was important to have a professional career, especially in careers where minorities were highly underrepresented. And at that time, and a larger influence was in the area of medicine. So my family was actually very strongly pushing me towards pursuing a career in medicine. So I actually went to college as a pre-med major, looking at how to become a pediatrician because I was really interested in addressing issues of social determinants of health with children, because the younger that you can provide interventions, the more successful a person is long term. So that was always in my mindset. That was always my goal. And when I was in college, there was always this joke, because pre-med majors, there's always the joke about bedside manners of doctors and how we aren't touchy-feely, we're just worried about the medicine. And so there was always this joke that you had to take this social worky touchy-feely course. And you had to take it in order to get the bachelor's degree. Took that course, changed my life. It changed my life. In that course, I was like, oh my goodness, medicine is important. You need to have people that know how to do surgery and be innovative and save lives. And oh my goodness, that is a needed career field. But so is social work. And it just changed my life, and looking at what are some ways that I can have an influence outside of just looking at social determinants of health on the medicine side. I wanted to move downstream and have an impact at a different level. Also, fun fact, turns out to be a doctor, you need to be good at math. Not very good at math. Math and science were not my friend in college. So when I also had an opportunity to maybe change my major into a way that didn't keep me up all night stressing about math and science, and I could do something that was more social work based, I had a better relationship with college. So I ended up changing my major into family child ecology. And through that major shift, where I was like, okay, what are the social work impacts that I need to look at while looking at the whole child, the whole family? So that includes, what are the community influences that matter? What are the medical influences that matter? What are the educational influence that matters? I ended up applying for an internship at a child welfare agency. And that's where I got my start. So I started out as an intern at a child welfare agency. My very first day, I went to a court hearing for a family that was in struggling and was facing removal. That was my very first day, was at court. And from there, I spent time as a foster care worker. I've worked directly as an adoption worker, as a licensing worker. And so I did all of that field work for about 5 years in different aspects of the direct frontline work. And then I started working my way through the management leadership teaming. So I did supervisory level, then I worked up, from first line supervisor, second line supervisor to director level. And that's how I got here.
Awesome. Wow. From the medical path to social work, and it's crazy because when I started college, went to the criminal justice route, and then found social work, and then switched from social work. Some would say I'm still in the social work realm because a lot of what I do is surrounded around it, but at a more political and policy route. But I definitely had that same experience, and then for me, math is not my strong suit. So initially my decision for college was like, I need to go there to pick something that I don't have to do a lot of math in, But going into my next question, and leading forward, what was the barriers? Now you have switched, now you have gotten to this arena. So taking on these supervisory roles, and then, you said first line and second line, and being in a director, and then getting to where you are now, what was the barriers, that you faced, in these decisions and moving forward, and I guess I'll ask, when you made that decision in college, to switch, was it a definite decision, or was it a decision you had to think on?
It's interesting, as you think about all of the levels of influence that steer your path, like little whispers of wind or little opportunities. And it's all about sort of, I thought I was going to go certain paths, but then opportunities would just kind of come into play. And I'm very spiritually minded. And so just, leaving myself open to those opportunities. Now, my parents will joke, they've always seen that in me, of this, just like, I'll just kind of, the wind turned left, let's go. They always thought that I was going to be a person selling flowers at the airport with just no direction in life, because I was so easily steered by different influences. But I really, and so that's always sort of been like my undercurrent, my energy of just being really open and relaxed to opportunities. And so it was one of those things where 18 is young to try to figure out what the rest of your life is going to look like. And some people are strong career goal oriented minded people, and they never change course, because that's where it is. And that just wasn't my path. My path was being really open to being steered and influenced. And I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. So I think that sort of helps as well, that I still am completely open. But, to put a finer point on it, really what it is was I wanted to look at how can I be utilized for good in this space? So in this time, with the talent that I have, how can I make an influence that's positive? So it was really looking at, with this opportunity that has presented itself, how can I make the best of it? And I always, am looking at opportunities to look at ways to grow my strengths, so that I can bring that best knowledge and opportunity and information to the table. So, you asked the question about barriers and what was it, like part of this journey. Working in a human services field is incredibly complex. And so you're dealing with people. So that's one thing. And you're dealing with people that bring a lot of different diversity and experiences to the table, in both the front end for the direct care that you're putting out as an output to the clients, and working with people and having them come to you. And you're dealing with people and their opinions and experiences that are formulating policy and driving directions as far as appropriations and resources. So you're always sort of bridging that gap between being responsive on both ends. So being responsive to the decision makers and being responsive to the individuals that are coming to you that you're trying to support. So that's sort of the difficulty and doing this work, and the challenges and getting there. And you'd asked too if there was any sort of academic life challenges. I think everybody has. I don't necessarily have like a unique experience, other than I think that there's typically, I don't want to speak too broadly, but in my personal experience, loss typically breeds growth and strength. And so for me, there was an experience of loss that sort of made me sit down and have that contemplative moment of, am I using my skill for good at the best time? And is this the energy that I want to utilize myself for good? And for me, that was child welfare. And it has just been a driving force to continue to do this work.
Okay. I'm over here struggling. I got an eyelash in my eye.
My contact completely fell out during the interview earlier today, so we're okay.
Oh, I was over here like I got everything prepared but some tissue. Okay. But I'm a one-eyed. So my next question, kind of follows right behind that. What does it mean to you to be a person of color, African American leader and role model in this role now? And some may say like a big decision maker.
Gosh. So that's a heavy question for me, because over the last couple weeks, I've been thinking about how I answer that question differently post George Floyd, and post the movements that happened in 2020. And it's amazing to me how much the paradigm has shifted, and how I would answer that question today than I would have 2 years ago. I have always served in leadership capacities. I serve locally on my local school board here in Lansing, and very involved in politics, and have always thought myself as being a system leader, reformative change, seat at the table, boots on the ground, involved person. And had always, prior to George Floyd, thought that my presence was enough. And in the paradigm shift from some movements that have happened, I have felt invigorated to be more intentional about using that voice proactively, instead of just presuming that my presence as an African American female denotes something. And so it's twofold. One, I think it's being visible as an African American and a female matters. So yes, that's still there. That's still something I think that's highly important. But it's also making sure that my voice is heard, and that lifting that we live in a place, we live in a state where racism was declared a public health emergency. And we are in that position because there is data and information that tells us that things don't lie. I was watching a documentary just yesterday, and I don't know if you know this, but child death rates for African Americans are worse today than they were during the time of slavery. And I'm telling you, when I watched it, I kept rewinding and watching and trying to verify data points. That says something, right? And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done in addressing disparities in the field that I work, which is in child welfare. And so having that be part of the core mission of the job of addressing inequities is just as important as making sure all my other data points get hit, right? So I still have to take care of budgets, even though I don't like math. I still got to make sure policies met, still have to make sure all those things are done, but it also matters that time is taken to address issues around race equity. And so that's what it means to me in this role. And so I hope that decisions that I make are advancing those issues of race equity. So, and I probably would have answered it in a more passive way 2 years ago. So it's just been really interesting to see how the paradigm has shifted over the last couple of years.
Definitely, and it's very interesting that you said that. I've never would have thought that. So I just learned something, just right then. But as you mentioned earlier, like the bureaus and what have you, they kind of were developing and branching out to your position and the other bureau directors in the heat of the pandemic, COVID, and what have you. So in that, which leads to my next question, there's been a lot of changes and different things that have happened federally and statewide with reforms and initiatives. And I guess could you speak to some of the initiatives now you have been in this role and what have you that you have embarked on? I want to make sure because I wrote this down. I get the full aspect of this question. Some of the initiatives that you have embarked on and that are happening now and why they're needed.
Yeah, great question. And I was like, oh, this is one that I can actually like, I'm super excited to talk about the transformative opportunities that we have, right? And so there are positive reforms for change that
Mhm.
are really like giving me excitement for opportunities to see that we're not going to keep trying to do the same things over and over. So probably the largest area of reform that has developed over the last couple of years is what's called the Family First Prevention and Services Act.
Mhm.
So what is unique about the Family First Prevention and Services Act, shorthand it's called FFPSA, is that typically what has happened prior to this act, which started rolling out in 2019, or was brought to light in 2019, was states right now, we write all different types of child welfare programming or family intervention programming, right? And prior to FFPSA, the only way a state could get reimbursed for their work. So you also, we write all of our plans and the federal government helps subsidize some of those plans. So they give states money. So states don't have to use all their general fund money to do these public health initiatives around prevention work, which had been great. So essentially what was happening in the past was the qualification to get access for federal reimbursement only happened after the kid was in the system.
Right.
So at the point in which the child and family entered the system, well, then all those services you gave them, you could write in your plan for reimbursement. Well, if you do that after the child has already entered the system, you missed about 15 opportunities beforehand to do something about it. So what FFPSA does is it allows states to go to the feds and say, we want to get reimbursed for all the work we try to do before the family has to come to the system.
Mhm.
And so that is a huge transformation to look at the system from a prevention lens. And so it not only frees up opportunity for the state to develop programming at a prevention level, it also helps alleviate our funding mechanism to also allow for there to be more resources after the fact too, because we're able to reimburse ourselves differently, right? So it just allowed for us to reimagine the structure of the funding and the systems and programs that we have. So it allows us to say, hey, we can fund this robust in-home services programming that we can do before we have to bring you into the system to provide interventions for your family. And so looking at ways that we can address poverty, homelessness, unsafe conditions in the home prior to a child having to become a ward or in custody of the department has just been huge. So even though I'm the out-of-home services bureau director, the fact that we have FFPSA also changed some qualifications for the quality of the work that we do. So it started to say, hey, if you want to call the feds and ask for reimbursement, you've got to meet these standards, right? You can't just have any old programming. It's got to be evidence-based programming. It has to show that it's going to move the needle. You have to start having the standard of training for the staff that are doing this work. It's a lot of work to do that, transform, but that is such an encouraging reform that I'm happy to be part of. So if it's one federal program, and so it's that Federal First Services Prevention Act, so FFPSA, but it trickles down into dozens of programs that we're able to implement across the state.
And from what I understand, this is fairly newly implemented to the state. So you guys are still finding ways as of like today to implement it in its best capacity, and as a political policy person myself, it's not a fix all, it's not a fix all. And I think it's important, that we let that be understood, because sometimes we put those expectations like, oh, well, everything's going to be great now we got this here, and they're going to do this. That's not the case, but it is a start to a better path, and utilizing services, initiatives, and resources, which kind of brings us to my other question, and I don't know if you kind of touched on this a little bit, but what are you hoping, and what is MDHS hoping to see as the outcomes of these initiatives and new resources as you guys are learning to utilize them, and also, let's push it out.
Yeah, so the hope is that we have families that remain intact, that are safe, that don't need our care, don't need our support and services, right? So at the end of the day, the goal is that we provide opportunities for families that provide them the supports that they need to be successful without us. And we want to be a resource when that help is needed, right? So to have the resources that are necessary to support families when they need us, but then also stand up enough supports for families to be successful without the ongoing interventions of the department. I always joke, a perfect child welfare system is the existence of no child welfare system, right? Not that I'm trying to talk myself out of a job, but if you think about it, really, if everything was perfect, we wouldn't be here, right? So you just have to think through what are the supports that we can continue to offer. And there's always, I think, going to be a necessity. It's like you have insurance in an emergency room. You don't hope to use it. You don't hope to use it. But if something happens, an infrastructure should be there to provide you emergency help, support, and relief, right? And so things are going to happen. Nobody could have expected COVID-19 to happen. There can be natural disasters that happen. We've experienced flooding. So there are going to be reasons why an infrastructure needs to be there. But I read something recently, and it was instead of focusing on praising people for being resilient, how about we remove the issues that cause them to have to be resilient in the first place? And so that is the goal, is that we're providing enough interventions that we don't have to be like, oh, look how well they bounce back. How about we say, let's never have them be in the situation they have to bounce back as much as we can prevent it, right? So there's going to be, like I said, natural disasters, public health crises, emergencies, things are going to happen. We're continuing, to walk alongside our partners, addressing issues with substance abuse. There's always going to be medical issues. There's always going to be continued needs and supports in the economy. So we are going to need to exist, I think in some capacity, but really reimagining what that looks like while continuing to raise our standard of care for the care that we are currently giving, our strong continued goals that we have within the department. And I'm really, looking forward to both you and your future listeners to hear from the other representatives from the department as well when you do that, to hear about our goals of really looking at how do we address issues of inequities, and having safe families that are together are really paramount focuses of the department.
Definitely. And that last piece, Lindsay, one of the questions I had coming up, and it's a lot of stigmas and labels and, if I may say, false narratives around the relationship with people and state agencies. And it's not just Michigan, it's the state agencies, and I guess, that question, and leading into my next question, this filler question is, we see that there's a lot of disparities between minorities and people of colors, in the aspect of prevention. How are we attacking that part, and is that being looked at, the stigmas and labels within the community, because I know we've talked about prevention, and I've been on some of the youth leadership with Director Starlin to kind of talk about some reforms and how to work with the communities and what have you. And one of the biggest things I said is that, coming up from the African-American community, I'm from Detroit, Michigan. And one thing that I see that is different for us now versus back then growing up is that when things went wrong in the Black and African-American community, say for instance, someone had a kid or a father left, or, someone passed away, the community rallied around together got canned goods and all these different things, and took it down to that person, and it said if they needed anything, you need me to watch the kid or whichever, I'm there. And when we say having that contingency in place, I see MDHS being that box of resources in that time, and switching that narrative from we're here to just take your kid, or we're here when things go bad,
Right.
to be in that box, but that's my thought process. What has been your thought process, in attacking that, narrative
Mhm.
that's surrounded around it?
Yeah, so I mean, like that stigma of like not even wanting to go to DHS offices, or when a marked car, it has the emblem, it comes up to your house, and all of those things are always something that we think about. Like, how do we do this better? How do we make ourselves partners in this work rather than the arm, the heavy that comes in after the fact? So really going back to that FFPSA, that prevention level process where we are coming alongside people in the community, more community-based hub type access points, rather than already coming into a situation when something has already reached a critical level. So I think it's one of those things that, time will have to move that needle, right? So I can say till, I'm blue in the face, we're here to help, we're here to help, we're here to help. But until people experience that's what it is, it's going to take that promoting that's what the real experience is, because we have some trauma that's been created around how interventions have previously occurred. And so really looking at being intentional about what's the word I'm looking for, about promoting what prevention looks like now as the system transforms. So, we write a plan and we submit it to the federal government to say, hey, this is what we want it to look like within Michigan. And then hopefully we're able to go from there to actually have the services in place to support families where they are. And like you said, I think that was a great analogy of like, we could be the box of resources that's like, hey, we're a toolkit. Right? We're the toolkit. You just came to borrow some tools for us. Not everybody has, like, I don't know about you, if I had to go fix my toilet right now, I don't have every tool, right? Because it's not something I do every day. So if a family experiences something they don't do every day, you come to us to borrow that tool. You borrow it, you fix it, and you go back. And that's what it should look like with interacting with the department.
Definitely. And the kind of I'm just flowing along here.
You're good.
There also has been a lot of stigmas surrounding mental health,
Mm-hmm.
and the professional aspect, but also society-wise. I know, being a young person, it's kind of hard, when you're like, okay, go to school or you got to work, but also think about your mental health,
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times we as people, we, put it on the back burner, or we're not focusing on it, or it has been instilled in us spiritual wise sometimes, or cultural wise, that,
Mm-hmm.
it's not as important. So what has been your experience with, self-care and mental health, and how have you instilled that in how have you instilled that or adjusted that throughout your life?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great question. So I'm a licensed master social work by trade. So I have a clinical endorsement and understand what all the books say about, well, not what all the books say, but all the books I had to learn to get my master's degree.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff has changed in the years since I've done that. But, at the time, what all the books said about, mental health and adjustments and disorders and prioritizing that. Here's what I would say. Your brain is a muscle or an organ that needs to be maintained and taken care of, just like your heart, liver, kidney, and stomach. So if your heart, liver, kidney, and stomach were sick, you would go get it helped, When your brain is not functioning the way it needs to in order for you to be a functioning human being, just like when your heart's not feeling good, just like when your stomach's not feeling good, you go get it help. And that just needs to be normalized, right? So just like somebody can pick up the phone and say, I can't come in today because my stomach hurts, you can't come in today because your brain hurts, because it's not working, because it's not firing where it needs to go. There's also, we all are just coming out of a pandemic. I don't know about you, but I didn't like wake up one day and was like, oh, I have a coping skill process for what happens when the world shuts down.
Right.
Like, it's okay to say you're not okay. Mm-hmm. And so if I, on my soapbox, welcome to my TED Talk, I would say use it's okay, especially as a minority, even as a strong person, to say that I need a subject matter expert that can lean in on this and get me help for this, just like I would if my stomach was hurting, just like I would if my heart was hurting. And knowing what I know about like mental health diagnoses and brain chemistries and development, it doesn't just fix itself, right? And so we have, for a period of time, society was like, oh, you know, you can take care of this. You just need to take a mental health day. I don't know about you, but there's no human being that would be having a heart attack and you go, did you meditate? Did you take care of it yourself? Did you relax? Take some deep breaths. No, you would say, go get treatment. Mm-hmm. So if your brain's having an attack, go get treatment. It's okay. And we just have to work on normalizing that.
Okay. You know, and I went through an experience myself, you know, and I've talked about this on some of my other episodes where mental health, you know, I faced some very hard battles with it. I started out, you know, to the beginning of my trauma and what have you. Mm-hmm. And this is when I was at home. I was placed in anger management. I was placed in therapy. Therapist was getting transferred up and left. That kind of was the first. That was the first kind of experience with, I guess we'll say, a negative experience with mental health, because there was no follow up, and I felt alone, and I felt like, okay, now I've built this relationship with somebody, and this is what happened. So I stepped back from that. Later on, I spent time in the juvenile and foster care, you know, side of things, and being in placement. And the first thing, you know, they give you a psych eval and all this other stuff, you know, and I felt my voice wasn't being heard, because on the juvenile side, the reason I went into the juvenile side is because I had experienced a lot of abuse, and eventually got to a place where I had numbed out as a person and felt not worthy, you know. So I had a lot of anger, and that anger lashed out in behavior issues that led me to going into juvenile group homes and what have you. And in there, after psych eval, they didn't really look at the abuse part. They just was like, well, you're acting out, so you're emotionally unstable, so you need to be on this medication. It wasn't until I got into the foster care side that they tried to hear me out, but also on that side of things, it's a lot of kids, you know, so you kind of just pushing along, you know. So as an adult, I took an initiative to revisit that with myself. After I was like, okay, all this stuff is in my head. I need to figure it out and get reassessed. And some of the things I was diagnosed with wasn't completely true. It was just me developing and healing from that trauma, you know. That's kind of just my experience of it. And I know a lot of people go through those things. You know, I went through the whole thing where I came from a family that would tell me, just pray about it. You know, I'm a Christian, so I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna pray about it, but also I know I need to do the work, you know. So that has been something that I faced. But my next question here, as we get ready to end out, I have three questions, I guess I would say. What is next for yourself? And I'm going to combine this. What tips and tools do you have? Okay, because I can't speak today. What tips and tools that you may have for the population that you serve, young professionals, and many more?
Gosh, so the first question, I don't know. I don't know what's next for me. Every day when an opportunity presents itself to explore how to move upstream to support making a systemic change, that's where I want to go. I want to continue to affect change. And so wherever that opportunity is able to present itself, I am thankful for the work that I do within the department. I'm happy to be here in this space and continue to affect change. So however that evolves, I'm happy to be part of anything that's moving towards that solution. What I would say, especially to folks, for kids and families that are impacted by the work that I do in the child welfare system, and the more time that I spend with children and families, is really lifting up that there are folks like me that would love to hear your voice. And if there's ever a time where you feel like something's not happening in a way that keeps you protected and safe, that for every step of the journey, both as if you're a care provider or as a youth yourself, that there are protected rights that you have to have your concerns heard. And that there's people that want to hear them and address them and not let them go unheard. It is a heartbreaking experience when I meet alum of the system that didn't know that there was places that they could have gone to air grievances and concerns. And so that's probably one of my biggest hopes, is that people that, as you talk about resilient voices and beyond, and the audience of this, that they know that there's a system of individuals that are working to try to do the right thing. And when we don't get it right, that we need to be held accountable and to hear that. And that we are not infallible and resistant from making mistakes, and that we need to be able to transform that. I'm optimistic about our transformation opportunities that we have as we continue to look at ways to reform the child welfare system. But any opportunities that we can provide to continue to make things better for children and families, that's why I do what I do. And I'm happy and blessed and proud to be able to do that every day.
Thank you. And I guess my last thing here is, any last comments or questions you have for myself, or anything you would like to leave here today?
Really just to reiterate that last point, that I hope, I don't know what your plan is. If you want to share my contact information with listeners, when you link the podcast, please feel free to do that. Happy to come back on again if you ever have any questions you would like for me to field. I hope that I have provided a good interview with some tidbits and takeaways that you find helpful. And just really, it was a pleasure meeting you, and happy to have spent this time with you today.
Thank you. And I must say this now, because I think it would be awesome to be able to do this. For the listeners that listen to this, if you stay in the state of Michigan, if you have any questions, specifically under the umbrella of Director Rachel here, shoot those to me, comment them as I post this. I'm going to collect them all. I'm going to, set up a time to meet up with her and do another episode and ask her those specific questions, and I'm going to do that in a sound environment, so she's not overwhelmed and, it's nothing crazy, so I'm going to do that here, so I'm sorry, if
okay.
you can't, just say it or whichever, but I think that's the best way to do it, because a lot of times I think people have been through things. We look at the system that has housed whatever we've been through as the bad guy, and that's not the case. And that's one of the biggest things that bringing you and your fellow directors on, is to explain that, there are humans behind this system. There are regular people that's out of the system, whether they have been through similar experiences or not. They are just like yourself and me, and they truly care, like yourself, you said you have been a foster care worker, you have been a licensing worker and an adoption, worker. So I personally, I was like, I don't know anybody that would go and do all that does not care. I don't. That's a lot to dedicate, of your life. And one thing I would say is, because I do a lot of panels to incoming workers to kind of, let them know how, different tips and tools that, to say it doesn't go home with you, it's not really true. It will go home with you. So to have dedicated so many years and have that stuff come back home with you, and to have those kids on your mind and wondering, those families on your mind and wondering if you're doing the best, and to be here today, I commend you for that. And it's truly an honor, to have you on. And I would even say this personally for myself, it is a great honor to see an African American woman in this position in MDHS. It's something that I can see young ladies aspiring to be, and as they're going through social work and what have you. And even for myself to, to see it is a pathway up there, just continue to do the work. So thank you. It has been a privilege. But yes, as I get ready to end this out, I say the same spiel. COVID is out there. It is doing its thing. Please take care of yourself. Utilize the precautions that have been said. I'm not a very political person and trying to make people whatever. Do what is necessary for yourself. Please stay safe. We're all this big village, so by you taking care of yourself, you take care of 10 or 10 million other people, so do that. But also I want you guys to have a great day, a great evening, great morning, great whenever. And this has been Resilient Voices and Beyond. Thank you.